Years passed after that anniversary at the little diner, and life, being life, didn't stop testing Ethan and Grace just because they had decided to choose each other again. Their love was stronger now, rooted deeper, but even strong trees bend in storms. And one of the biggest storms came the year Noah turned 13 and Lily turned 9. The year everything felt like it was happening too fast and too hard all at once. Noah started middle school and began pulling away, spending more time in his room with headphones on, giving one-word answers. And Lily, once their sunshine baby, started having trouble sleeping, waking up from nightmares about losing her parents after overhearing an argument one night they thought had been quiet enough. Money was still a constant puzzle, and then out of nowhere, the auto shop where Ethan had worked for years got sold to a new owner who decided to restructure, which was just a polite way of saying he was letting people go. And on a gray Tuesday afternoon, Ethan walked out carrying a cardboard box with his name on the side and his tools rattling inside, feeling like the ground had dropped out from under him. When he sat in his truck, staring at the steering wheel, shame burning his chest. He didn't want to call Grace because he hated the idea of saying, "I lost my job," out loud, but this time, instead of shutting down and pretending everything was fine, he remembered the promise he'd made in therapy, to let her in even when he felt weak. So he called her. She was in the break room at the hospital, sipping cheap coffee from a paper cup, and she heard the crack in his voice before he even finished saying her name. When he finally choked out, "They let me go," she didn't sigh, didn't say of course or what now. She just said, "Come home. We'll figure out together." And those words wrapped around his bruised pride like a blanket, soft but strong. That night, after the kids were asleep, they sat at the kitchen table again, just like when things had been falling apart years earlier. But this time the energy was different. There was fear, yes, but there was also a quiet, steady sense of we, not you versus me. They spread out bills, talked about savings, brainstormed options. Ethan confessed a secret he'd tucked away long ago, cheeks flushing like a teenager. "I've always wanted to start my own small mobile mechanic business, where I go to people's homes, help single moms, older folks, people stuck on the road. I just never thought I was good enough or smart enough to run it." And Grace, eyes shining with a mix of pride and tenderness, reached across the table, squeezed his hand, and said, "You fix people's cars like it's an art, Ethan. You care more than any mechanic I've ever seen. If anyone can do this, it's you. Let's take the risk together." They cut back on extras, no takeout, no unnecessary shopping, cheaper phone plans, and Grace picked up a few more shifts temporarily, even though the hours were heavy, because she believed in his dream, and she wanted their kids to see that sometimes love means sacrificing now for something beautiful later. They designed a simple logo together on the old family laptop, printed business cards at a discount print shop, and Ethan hand-painted his truck with his new company name, feeling both terrified and alive. At first, business was slow. Some days no calls came at all, and he wondered if he had made a mistake, if pride had dragged him into a dead-end alley. But slowly, one satisfied customer turned into 3, then 10, because Ethan didn't just fix cars. He showed up when people were stranded, talked to them with respect, charged fairly, sometimes even less when he knew someone was struggling. And people in small towns remember how you treat them when they're vulnerable. Word of mouth became his best advertisement. And one afternoon, when he came home earlier than usual, grease on his hands and a smile on his face, he waved a stack of invoices and said, laughing, "I think we might actually pull this off." And Grace hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. But while his business grew, something else simmered in the background. Grace's body was beginning to show signs of exhaustion. She kept brushing off with, "I'm fine, just tired," shrugging away the headaches, the chest tightness, the way her hands sometimes shook when she tried to write impatient charts. She didn't want to worry Ethan when he was finally finding his footing. So she pushed through until one night it all caught up with her. It was a late winter evening, the kind where the wind howled around the house and sleet tapped at the windows, and they were in the living room helping Lily with a school project, while Noah scrolled on his phone nearby, pretending not to listen but absorbing every word. Grace stood up to get more tape, paused, put a hand to her chest, and for a second Ethan thought she just lost her balance. But then her face went pale, her legs buckled, and she collapsed onto the carpet. The world tilted. Noah shouted, "Mom!" Lily started crying, and Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs as training from Emergency-Storeis Grace had once told him kicked in. He checked her breathing, grabbed his phone with shaking hands, called 911, and tried to keep his voice steady as he followed the operator's instructions. On the ride to the hospital, sirens wailing, red lights flashing, he held her hand and whispered over and over, "Don't you dare leave me, Grace. We're not finished yet. We have grandkids to spoil one day. We haven't even taken that stupid RV trip you keep talking about." Tears blurring his vision. Turned out Grace had been ignoring warning signs of severe anemia and stress-related complications from overworking. Herself, something her own doctor later gently scolded her about. "You take care of everyone but yourself. That's not sustainable, Grace." Lie in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors, face pale but eyes still full of fire. She looked at Ethan and said in a small, raw voice, "I was so afraid of being a burden. I didn't want to slow you down when things were finally going well for you." And Ethan, eyes red-rimmed, took her hand and said, "You are not a burden. You are the reason I didn't give up when everything felt impossible. I don't want any dream that doesn't include you living long and healthy and laughing. We had just a dream, not lose you." And right then they made another agreement, this time about health boundaries and rest. When she came home, still weak but recovering, they changed their rhythm again. Ethan, awkward teenager with headphones around his neck, secretly watched how his parents handled stress, scribbling unspoken lessons into his own heart. That real men cry in hospital rooms and real women ask for help when they're breaking. That love isn't just roses and anniversaries, but 3 a.m. ER visits and handwritten business plans on napkins. One evening after dinner, when Grace was strong again and they were laughing about something Lily had done at school, Noah suddenly asked, "Did you guys ever think about giving up? Like, actually not staying together?" And the room went quiet. Ethan and Grace exchanged a long look, a silent conversation passing between them. And then Ethan said honestly, "Yes, we thought about it, but every time we did, we also thought about what we would lose, the history, the memories, the future we hadn't lived yet." And Grace added, "We realized love isn't about never wanting to leave. It's about choosing to stay, especially when leaving seems easier." And Noah, trying to act nonchalant, nodded slowly, but his eyes softened and a seed of understanding was planted. Years rolled forward like pages flipping in a well-worn book. Noah graduated high school, walking across the stage in blue gown while Ethan and Grace cheered so loudly strangers turned to smile at them. And Lily, who had once clung to her mom's hand in the dark, blossomed into a confident girl who started a little side project, making handmade cards with quotes about hope and selling them at local fairs. Often using lines she had overheard her parents saying to each other on hard days. When the kids both eventually left for college, the house felt quiet in a way that felt strange and echoey. No slamming doors, no homework spread over the dining table, no teenage sighs or giggles. And for a few weeks, Ethan and Grace wandered around like tourists in their own lives, half grieving, half curious about what came next. "Do you think we'll get bored of each other?" Grace joked one night as they sat on the couch, the TV playing some forgettable show, and Ethan laughed, pulling her closer, saying, "If we survive job loss, therapy, health scares, and teenagers, I think we'll be okay." But the truth was, there was a tenderness in these new empty nest years they hadn't expected. They relearned each other like two people meeting for the second time, going on small weekend trips, trying new restaurants, rediscovering old hobbies, dancing slowly in the kitchen. Again, just because a song they loved came on. One autumn afternoon, while raking leaves in the yard, Grace looked at their home, the chipped paint on the porch, the wind chimes they'd hung years ago, the marks on the doorframe where they had measured the kids' heights, and her eyes filled with grateful tears. "We almost lost all of this," she said softly, and Ethan, leaning on his rake, followed her gaze and whispered, "We almost walked away from the best thing we've ever built," then added, "Thank you for staying when it would have been easier to go." And she smiled, wiping her eyes, replying, "Thank you for learning how to love me better even when it meant facing some hard truths." When their 30th anniversary came around, their kids, now adults with lives of their own, threw them a surprise party in the backyard, stringing fairy lights in the trees, setting up old photos on a table. Their teenage prom picture, their wedding day, a grainy shot of them holding baby Noah, a beach selfie, Ethan's first mobile mechanic truck, A candid of Grace sleeping on the couch after a night shift with a toddler sprawled on top of her, all the tiny, ordinary moments that had stitched themselves into something extraordinary. During the toast, Noah cleared his throat, holding up a glass of sparkling cider, and said, "To my parents, who taught me that marriage isn't about being perfect people in a perfect life, but about imperfect people who refuse to stop showing up for each other." And Lily added, teary-eyed, to Mom and Dad, who proved that love can break and still be rebuilt stronger. And as Ethan and Grace stood there, fingers intertwined, faces lined with age and laughter and tears, they felt this overwhelming wave of gratitude for every hard conversation, every second chance, every time they'd chosen us over ego. Later that night, after everyone left and the yard was quiet again, they sat together on the porch swing, the same one that had held them through so many seasons. Watching the stars blink in the dark sky, Ethan turned to her, brushing a strand of gray hair from her face, and said, "If someone had shown me back then, on the nights we were sleeping back to back, not talking, this moment right here, I think I would have fought a little sooner, held on a little tighter." And Grace smiled, resting her head on his shoulder, replying, "Maybe, but maybe we needed the breaking to understand how precious the mending is." And as the crickets sang in the cool night wrapped around them, their hearts settled into a deep, peaceful knowing that their story, with all its mess and beauty, wasn't just a love story between a husband and wife, but a testament to every choice they had made to stay, grow, and forgive again and again until their whole life became one long, gentle, hard-earned, happy ending. In a small American town where the Friday night lights from the high school stadium glowed like tiny suns, and everybody knew everybody's last name, lived a couple whose love story had once looked perfect from the outside. Ethan and Grace Miller, high school sweethearts, now in their early 30s, parents, homeowners, and the kind of people neighbors waved across white picket fences. But behind their blue front door, their marriage was a battlefield of unspoken words, exhausted hearts, and dreams left on the back burner for later. When they were teenagers, they had promised each other the world under a sky full of fireworks one 4th of July, swearing they would never become one of those couples who stopped talking, stopped kissing, stopped dreaming. But life, with its bills, broken cars, sick kids, and endless responsibilities, quietly tested every vow they made. Ethan worked long shifts at a local auto repair shop, his hands always smelling like oil and metal, his back aching, his mind heavy with worry about mortgage payments and medical bills, especially after their son Noah developed asthma that required expensive inhalers and late-night ER visits, while Grace worked as a night shift nurse at the county hospital, spending her nights caring for strangers and her days trying to be a mother, a wife, a homemaker, and a woman who still remembered her own name. They were both tired, but instead of holding each other, they had started resenting each other. Grace resented Ethan for not being more emotionally present, for zoning out with sports on TV, for missing Noah's school events, while Ethan resented Grace for always seeming upset with him, for pulling away when he tried to kiss her, for turning their bed into a place of sleep and silence instead of laughter and intimacy. They didn't mean to hurt each other, but hurt piled up slowly like dust on a forgotten shelf. And one cold December night, when the Christmas lights flickered in their living room, and the sound of distant carols filled the air, everything finally cracked. It was supposed to be a cozy Friday night. Grace had baked cookies with Noah and their 4-year-old daughter, Lily, and they all waited for Ethan to come home so they could decorate the tree together. But he was late again, stuck with an emergency job at the shop, or so he said. When he finally walked in, shoulders slumped, smelling like gasoline and winter air, Grace was standing in the living room with boxes of ornaments still unopened and disappointment written all over her face. The kids already yawning on the couch, half asleep. "You missed it," she said quietly. And those 3 words were heavier than any accusation, because what she really meant was, "You missed us. Again, you keep missing us. And I don't know how much more of this I can take." Ethan, already raw from a bad day and an argument with his boss about overtime pay, snapped defensively, "I'm doing the best I can, Grace. I can't be everywhere at once." And she replied, "Your best never seems to include us." And suddenly years of exhaustion and swallowed pain exploded into loud words and tears she hadn't planned to show. They argued in the kitchen, voices low but sharp, trying not to wake the kids, yet knowing their whispered fight was just another crack in a growing fault line. Grace finally said with shaky breath, I feel like I'm married to a roommate, not a husband. And Ethan shot back. And I feel like I'm nothing but a walking paycheck too. You. And the silence that followed was louder than any shouting, like both of them had finally said the ugliest fears they had been holding inside. That night, Ethan slept on the couch, staring at the blinking lights on the Christmas tree, wondering when love had become so painful, and Grace lay in bed staring at the ceiling, tears soaking her pillow, clutching a photo from their wedding day, thinking, how do we get so far from this? Over the next few weeks, things did not magically fix themselves. They became polite but distant, exchanging necessary words about school pickups, grocery lists, and doctor appointments, but not about dreams or feelings or thoughts. Ethan started staying later at work, saying yes to every extra shift, both to escape the heaviness at home and try to feel useful, while Grace poured herself even more into her patients, choosing double shifts rather than coming home early to a silence that felt like failure. But love, real love, does not vanish overnight. It hides, it waits, it aches, and it sends small reminders to memory. One snowy evening, as Grace walked to the hospital hallway, she passed a room where an elderly woman was holding her husband's hand, both of them frail but glowing with a quiet tenderness that seemed unbreakable, and she overheard the woman whisper, "We almost divorced in our 40s, you know, but we chose to stay and learn how to love again." And something inside Grace cracked open that night in the staff break room. She sat alone with a cup of lukewarm coffee, scrolling through old photos on her phone. Ethan holding newborn Noah with tears in his eyes. Ethan asleep on the couch with baby Lily on his chest, tiny hand gripping his shirt. Ethan and Grace at the beach, sunburned and laughing. Ethan holding up a sold sign in front of their first house, pride radiating from his face. Her heart twisted with the realization that beneath the frustration and distance, she still loved him, desperately. And that scared her even more, because loving someone meant risking hurt again. At the same time, Ethan was his truck outside their darkened house, too drained to go inside yet, listening to an old playlist Grace had made for him years ago called For My Favorite Person, full of cheesy love songs they once danced in the kitchen. And as the lyrics wrapped around memories of her head on his chest, her laugh when he told bad jokes, her stubbornness, her warmth, he realized he wasn't just tired from work. He was tired of living half a life, tired of acting like he didn't care when he cared so much it scared him. His father had always told him, "Son, marriage isn't about who's right. It's about choosing each other when it's hard." And now, sitting in the cold truck, he finally understood what that meant. The next morning, instead of going straight to the shop, Ethan drove to a small coffee place where Grace used to study in nursing school, the place where he had once. Surprised her with flowers and a handmade note that said, "I choose you, today, tomorrow, always." And he sat there staring at his coffee, feeling like a coward and a fool. Then he pulled out his phone and searched marriage counselor near me, something his pride had always resisted. But love, real love, is stronger than pride. He made an appointment, knowing she might say no, might laugh, might be too hurt to care, but he also knew he had to try. That evening, when Grace came home from the hospital, exhausted, hair pulled back in a messy bun, legs aching, she found Ethan sitting at the kitchen table without the TV on, without his phone, just sitting there with a piece of paper in his hand, and fear in his eyes. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice soft, and something about the way he said it, vulnerable, shaky, made her heart pause. He slid the paper toward her, a printed confirmation of the therapy appointment, and said, "I don't want to lose you, Grace. I don't know how to fix this alone, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes if you are. I'm sorry I made you feel alone while standing right next to you." Tears flooded her eyes before she could control them, because she had begged God silently for a sign, for something to prove their love wasn't dead, just sleeping, and here he was trying. She sat down, hands trembling, and whispered, "I'm tired too, Ethan. I don't want to live like this anymore, but I also don't want to give up on us." And in that moment, without any dramatic music or cinematic fireworks, just two broken people at a messy table with kids' crayons still scattered around, they chose each other again. Therapy wasn't easy. It was awkward at first, full of uncomfortable questions and old wounds being reopened, but slowly they began to understand not just each other but themselves. Ethan learned that his silence felt like rejection to Grace, that when he shut down after a long day, she heard, "You don't matter," even though what he meant was, "I'm scared and overwhelmed." Grace learned that her criticism, sharp and constant, made Ethan feel like he couldn't win no matter how hard he tried. That he heard, "You're a failure," where she meant, "I'm scared and I need you." They started practicing small changes. Ethan turned off his phone during dinner, asking the kids about their day, holding Grace's hand under the table like he used to, and Grace left him little sticky notes in his lunchbox like she did when they were first married, reminding him he was appreciated. "Thank you for working so hard for us. I'm proud of you. Can't wait to see you tonight." They began having couch check-ins once a week after the kids were asleep. No TV, no distractions, just him asking, "How are you really feeling?" Sometimes those talks led to tears, sometimes to laughter, sometimes to quiet. But every time, they built another brick in a new foundation. Slowly, the anger softened, replaced by compassion. One rainy night, after a particularly raw session where they talked about their miscarriage years ago, a loss they never truly grieved together, Grace broke down, sobbing, "I felt like I lost you and the baby at the same time." And Ethan held her, his own tears falling, whispering, "I didn't know how to carry my grief and yours, so I shut down, and I'm so sorry I left you alone in that." And in that shared heartbreak, something heavy lifted, like they were finally mourning together instead of apart. As months passed, their home began to feel different. The kids noticed first. Noah remarked one night, "You and Dad laugh more now," and Lily giggled, "Daddy kisses Mommy in the kitchen again." And those small observations were proof that love leaves evidence. One summer, with money still tight but hearts healing, they decided to take a cheap road trip instead of an expensive vacation, borrowing Ethan's brother's old camper, stuffing it with snacks, board games, blankets, and dreams. They drove across states, stopping at gas station diners, national parks, and small lakes, making memories that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with presence. One evening, parked near a quiet lake in Tennessee, as the kids slept inside the camper and the sky shimmered with stars, Ethan and Grace sat outside on folding chairs, hands intertwined, feet touching the cool grass. He turned to her, the firelight reflecting in his eyes, and said, "If you had walked away that night in December, I would have understood, but I'm so grateful you stayed long enough for me to wake up." And she smiled, brushing his cheek, replying, "I almost did, Ethan, but I remember how it felt to dance with you in our tiny apartment, how it felt to hear you pray for our family, how it felt the first time you held Noah. And I couldn't shake the feeling that our story wasn't supposed to end in silence, but in something softer." And he whispered, "I want to keep choosing you every messy, beautiful day." And she said, "Then let's do that, for real this time." Years rolled by, filled with ordinary days that began to feel extraordinary simply because they lived them with intention. Pancake Saturdays, family movie nights, late-night talks on the porch, arguments that no longer spiraled into cruel words but ended in apologies and hugs. They created new traditions like Yes Day, once a month, where each family member picked one small thing to do. Noah chose shooting hoops at the park. Lily chose backyard picnics with fairy lights. Ethan chose grilling and country music. Grace chose slow dancing in the kitchen. And through these moments, they stitched a new version of love, one that wasn't about perfection but persistence. When their 15th wedding anniversary arrived, they didn't throw a big party or post a perfect Instagram reel. Instead, they went back to the small diner in their hometown, where it all began, the same one with torn leather, booths, and the old jukebox in the corner. The owner, who remembered them, smiled and said, "Back where it all started, huh?" And they laughed, sitting in the same booth where Ethan had first asked her to be his girlfriend. Midway through the meal, Ethan slid a folded piece of paper across the table, just like he did years ago with the "I choose you" note. With shaking fingers, Grace unfolded and read, "I choose you, not just on the easy days, not just when we're young and everything feels exciting, but on the days when we're tired, scared, and not our best. I choose you when money is tight, when kids are sick, when losses hurt, when we misunderstand each other. I choose you when we're laughing and when we're crying. I choose you when we're gray-haired and slow, when our kids are grown and the house is quiet. I choose you when we don't know what tomorrow holds. I choose you for 1,000 second chances." Tears blurred her vision as she looked up at the man who had broken her. Hard at times, but had also fought to mend it. The man who had grown, apologized, stayed, tried. "I choose you too," she whispered, voice thick with emotion, and they leaned across the table, kissing softly, Not like teenagers desperate to prove something, but like two adults who had survived storms and still found each other standing. Years later, when their children were older and asked them, "What's your secret? How did you stay married when so many couples didn't?" Ethan would smile and say, "We didn't always get it right, but we kept coming back to each other." And Grace would add, "We learned that love isn't losing the spark. It's learning to tend the fire even when the wood is damp and the wind is strong." And as they sat together on their front porch swing, fingers intertwined, watching grandkids play in the yard where their own children once ran, they knew that their story, with all its cracks and repairs, was not a failure, but a living proof that real love isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking and healing and choosing each other again and again, until one day you look back and realize that every hard choice, every late-night conversation, every humble apology led you here, to this quiet, golden moment where your heart finally whispers, "We made it." And that simple truth became the happy ending they had once only dreamed of under a sky full of fireworks.